What made you start sharing your interracial dating experiences on YouTube?
And for sure, there were some like side eyes, but
Like a lot of white men are under the impression that black women aren't into them. And
I do see this growth of interracial couples, and in particular, interracial couples that are made up of white men and black women.
like you're like trying to go through everything. And it's like, no one's watching this, right?
You just know that if we were a same race couple, they would not be talking to us right now.
Welcome, guys. We're back for another episode. Glad you guys are here. And our guest today is an influencer who has her own YouTube channel called Amanda Awakens, where she talks about the Black millennial female experience. She covers dating outside your race, living in Tacoma, Washington, and some of her outdoor adventures. And it's a great channel. You guys should check it out. And we love her content. We loved it so much that we reached out to her and wanted to have her on as a guest here on our podcast. And she's here. Amanda from Amanda Awakens. Amanda, thanks for being here and hanging out with us today.
Thank you. That is so nice of an intro. Like, I would never describe my own channel like that. That's just so kind and thoughtful. So thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out.
For sure. No, there's a lot of great, you have a lot of great videos and you cover a lot of different things. And you're pretty extensive on the interracial dating thing, and that's something we've covered on this channel in the past and got a really good response from it. And what made you start sharing your interracial dating experiences on YouTube?
Yeah, well, it was a total fluke. Like, when I started, that was not even on my radar, never thought about it. I actually started my channel because I used to be a teacher, and I taught middle school at a Montessori school. And I was still really new to this Montessori world. And I just remember I was a huge YouTube fan, watch YouTube religiously. And I kept trying to find content on like Montessori teachers, Montessori curriculum. And I could never find anything because it's so niche, especially here in the States. And so I was like, I'm just going to start a channel then. Like, if there's nothing, I will, fill the gap myself. And it's pretty weird. Like, in one video, the person I was with at the time, I think they walked in the background of the video, and someone just happened to see that and was like, hey, are you in an interracial relationship? And if so, just curious, I'm also in one and this is really new to me, and I'd just be interested to hear your experience. And so I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Why not? This channel is still, I think I made 3 videos at that point. So it's I don't have a niche. I can kind of do whatever. And so I just made a video on that topic. And from there, I just got so many comments. And I don't know. At the time, I think the amount of views I got was probably 40 or 50. But when it's your first video or, fourth, you're like, oh my gosh. So,
yeah. That's amazing. Our first video was I think 5 or 8. And I think half of them were ours, just watching them, right? You're trying to go through everything. And it's no one's watching this, right? But 50 off, right off the bat, that's pretty good. You're getting some traction there, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And so from just reading the responses and comments, I was really surprised that so many people not only could relate, but had more questions. And so I think it just kind of became a thing of I'm doing this, I'm living this, I'm not an expert, but I can share with you what I've seen and done, and here we are.
Yeah, well, that's an understatement. You say you're not an expert, but I mean, there's so many different areas you cover with so many different videos on this topic. And like I said, I started watching it and I couldn't stop. And it was okay, this is a lot. And being in an interracial relationship myself for many years, obviously it appealed to me. But I mean, that's something we're seeing more and more of now. It's becoming a lot more prevalent. And I think these days, and I want to get your take on this, a lot of white men are under the impression that black women aren't into them. And obviously there's, going to be a segment of any group that's not into another particular group. And that's understandable. But I think 15 or 20 years ago, that was a lot more prevalent than it is today. Do you see that changing, or is it just me?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just from the comments and emails that I get, there's still a lot of people, there's still a lot of white men who are like, whoa, until I watched your videos or saw your channel, like, I didn't know that there was this segment of the population. I didn't know that there was this desire. So I think that's still true today. And I do see this growth of interracial couples, and in particular, interracial couples that are made up of white men and black women. And I think it's really cool. I think a lot of it, I mean, again, I'm not 100% sure of like what is the cause of this, but I do think a lot is just representation and exposure. I see even with commercials that I try to avoid with my streaming subscriptions, but I do see commercials
Yeah.
of more and more iterations of interracial couples. And I think with social media and just having more exposure to different people has helped with that.
Yeah, there's a lot in ads. You're right. Like I remember years ago, I remember I was looking at like it was like a builder, like a home building company, a construction company that built homes. And I was looking at like one of their flyers, and there was like a black woman with a white man. This is like ages ago. Like this was easily 15 years ago. And that was like a big deal to see that back then. But like, of course, somebody like myself or even somebody like yourself, that's going to like jump out at you when you see that, especially when it's not as common. But you're right. Like I see it in ads all over the place now. And, you know, that obviously advertisers and marketing people are seeing that that's more common. And so they're cashing in on that. But it's just interesting how things shift over time the longer you walk this earth, and you see how you know, just different demographics are getting together that didn't get together as much before. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
Yep.
Clearly there's cultural differences between, you know, a lot of white people and a lot of black people here in the US. I'm primarily focusing on that because that's where we are, both of us. When do you think those differences can be an obstacle when it comes to dating outside one's race?
Yeah, I think, well, this is an obstacle that I think, or a potential dynamic for an obstacle in any relationship, but in particular in a relationship where you have cultural differences. I think it's when you have this dynamic of a lack of empathy and like an excess of feeling knowledgeable, and there not really being a lot of flexibility in between that. So I feel that, at least in my own experiences, when you're with someone who they feel that they kind of know it all on this topic, and the
Yeah.
topic is you and your experience,
Yeah.
and they're not necessarily willing to alter or change or grow in their knowledge, that definitely I feel can lead to a lot of obstacles, and just having a lack of empathy for an experience that's not familiar to
Mhm.
their own, that doesn't resonate or align with what they've seen or what they think they've seen.
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think like that stems from? Like I know that some people can be like know-it-alls. Do you think some people might be like, you know, uncomfortable with the subject matter, so they just try to like sweep it under the rug? Like, what do you think? What do you think's happening when you experience
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think in general, or in a lot of cases, with that kind of know it all type or just that rigid intellect, I do think a lot of that does come from insecurity. Because, you know, I wish I could remember the quote, but it's always stuck with me, of how you have to be really careful and really kind when you prove someone wrong, because you're essentially
Hmm.
undermining, you're changing their worldview, you're changing their perspective.
Yeah.
And, you know, realistically, that is all that we have, is our perspective, our the life that we've lived. That is all that we have. And so I think for those
Hmm.
individuals, it really undermines kind of like the foundations of not only what they've seen, but who they are and who they think they are.
Yeah. But I think like, you know, I wrestle with that, you know, as a man because maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just me getting older. I have no idea. But like, I try to keep an open mind on things. So if somebody's schooling me on something I know nothing about, I don't know, maybe when I was younger, I would be more dismissive of it. I don't know what that is, but like, I just think it's wise to just like, talk less, listen more in those situations and take it as a teaching moment. Do you think there's ever like a male female dynamic to that where like sometimes men think they're superior to women? Do you think there's any of that going on when people
Yeah,
act that way?
absolutely. I mean, it's funny that you say you think it's wise, but how many people out there do you think are really that wise and are always so conscious even of their
Yeah.
like behavior and how they're interacting with people? I don't
Yeah.
think the majority or even like the average person is really that conscious and that aware even when they're having these conversations.
Mhm.
But I'm sure that there is. I mean, I'm always kind of on the fence, and I'm a little reluctant to just chalk things up ever to just gender and male and female. But I'm sure that when it comes to the social conditioning of men and women, that there is an element of, if not a conscious feeling of superiority. I do think that
Mhm.
there is just that tendency in a lot of cases for men to kind of lean into what they see as the rational or the logical. And for a
Yeah.
lot of us women,
Yeah.
we do tend to lean more towards our feeling, and our feeling
Yeah.
sometimes can guide our experience. I mean, I think we're all both capable of both of those things, but I'm sure that there is that
Yeah.
element to it.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I'm speaking, as somebody in like, the midlife stage of my life. Not, I hate saying midlife because I'm not in a crisis situation, right? But like, I can remember being like late teens, early 20s where I didn't walk around as much with that attitude, and like just on any topic. I'm not even talking like race. I'm talking anything. So like, you know, when I was younger, I put my foot in my mouth like many times just over, you know what I mean? I think that happens to us as we're younger because we just don't have as much time on this earth and as much wisdom to navigate properly in social situations, right? Like, or you're saying something about somebody and they're like standing right over there and you didn't know, right? Like you're more careful about those kind of things when you get older, I think. I mean, that's the hope, but as you said, not everybody's so sharp, possibly ever in their lives. So, like, who knows? But I mean, it's interesting, and I don't want to like harp too much on gender, but I can't help but think there's other aspects to it too. Because we had Avram Weiss, who's from Psychology Today, on a few months back, and he has for decades studied the relationships between men and women. We didn't get into race stuff, but just more men than we think actually fear women. And Avram's work has led to a lot of those conclusions, and he seems to be onto something with that. And so I wonder if it's not superiority, if there's an inferiority where you're schooling somebody on something that they don't know and they feel stupid, so they don't want to take that as a teaching moment. You know what I mean? I don't know. There's so many different reasons for the way people act the way they act, but it's just interesting when we look at that dynamic. So you date interracially. You've talked about it a lot on your channel. Have you ever gotten any pushback from like family or people in your own social circles for dating
Yeah,
interracially?
definitely. It's kind of funny because I think people, or I don't know what would people think, but I always assumed it would be the opposite of what it actually was. I always assumed that the pushback would come from family and all friends would be on board because, I'm thinking my friends were all like-minded, similar ages, similar
Yeah,
demographic, etc. And it was actually most
right.
often the total opposite, where for my family, they definitely just wanted whatever made me happy and whoever made me happy. And for sure, there were some like side eyes, but generally speaking, once
Yeah,
a person was met, like my own partner now, like once he was met, it's like, oh, he's a lovely person. He's great. So, we're rooting for
yeah,
you. But a lot of the comments that I heard, especially, when I was like early 20s, was mostly just from like other girlfriends who had their own, stereotypes and ideas of what being with a white man is
yeah,
like versus being with a black man or really any man of color. and they definitely did not
Hmm.
hesitate to share that with me. And so, yeah, I think now as I've gotten older, like, and I've been in places where they're just in general, like now, I live on the West Coast. There's a lot more diversity
Hmm.
when it comes to interracial relationships and just a lot more kind of like-minded people I found. But oh yeah, I experienced it for sure.
Yeah. Do you think that people's and I mean I guess I'm asking about your friend circles if you haven't really received it much from family, but do you feel like those opinions have evolved over time or do you still deal with it now? Have things
Yeah,
changed over the years?
absolutely. I mean, even within the years during that time, like I was in a really long term relationship in my early 20s. And I remember from the beginning of them being like, oh, okay, like you're with that person, to wow, I wish I could find someone like that person. Or like, oh my gosh, like, I've had in the last year, like an old friend be like, hey, I've been thinking about maybe trying to open up my dating options. I know you've always done that. So, absolutely. I have
Yeah.
seen the change, and I really think a lot of it is just more representation, more exposure, and just seeing these
Hmm.
relationships last and seeing how they're not really that different.
Yeah. Do you get looks when you're in public with your boyfriend?
That's funny. I asked him because gosh, I have no self awareness anywhere. Like I'm the person that's like, oh wow, look at this tree, or like let's pull out the plant finder app. Like what? We're going north. I thought this was east. Like I am definitely not the person paying attention to what other people are doing. But I asked him because he's kind of the opposite and very observant. And he said that not as much as he would have maybe thought, but
Hmm.
definitely that he has noticed it. And, it's funny. I think I even talked about this, I don't know, in a video once. Like, I have definitely had conversations with people when I'm with my partner where you just know that if we were a same race couple, they would not be talking to us right now. Or they would not be asking us the questions that they're asking us. It's almost like they're trying to figure out, like, like, what are you? Like, this is weird. Like, I don't know how to
Yeah.
process this. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember we were in upstate New York. This is ages ago. And some older women were trying to get their car started, and it was one of those moments in this like rainy parking lot. It might even have been snowing. I don't remember where. All these different people just from all over the place were trying to help, and like my wife and I walked up there, and we're helping them with the jumper cables, and we must have been there interacting with all the people around us for like 10 minutes, and somebody finally said, "Oh, you guys are together?" Like they didn't even realize that we were together, right? And like we walked up together. I don't think we were holding hands or doing anything like super obvious, but people just made the assumption that I didn't know her and she didn't know me. And I just found it funny. And obviously, if we were the same race, the assumption would have been totally different.
Right.
It's funny how people react for sure. And
Absolutely.
sometimes you'll see people looking, and I'll see them looking at my wife, and then they're looking at me, and then they're looking at my wife, looking at me, and then like they're looking at our kids if our kids are with us, and you just see this like analysis, right?
Yep.
They're trying to figure out the dynamic, and I don't know, it gets entertaining sometimes. Nobody gives us a hard time, like it's all good. It never gets unfriendly. Like we're fortunate that way, I think. But it's funny when you watch other people trying to figure out your dynamic. I'm sure you've had those moments.
Absolutely. One thing that comes to mind for me, one of the things I have noticed before, and who knows, it could be just people trying to be considerate or even people not paying attention. But one thing I've noticed almost consistently is that if we go to the grocery store together and if we don't go to the self checkout, almost always, even if we're standing beside each other, which is hard to do in a lane, but even if we are,
Yeah.
the bar to separate the groceries will always go down between our stuff. And I'm like, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're right. Like, I'm just getting my own thing. It's just
Yeah.
so funny. That seems like it's always the assumption, and then you have to do the awkward lift the bar and slide it back together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. Um, yeah, obviously if again it's a same race couple, those assumptions just fly out the window. But like I will say this, sometimes like it's just sometimes it can be like a personality dynamic. So I'll see like a white man and a black woman that if I saw them separately, I would never think that they would date what, you know, and I'm not sounding like judgmental. I'm just saying they look like two different people sometimes. And I don't see that all the time, but sometimes it's just like a dynamic personality type, the way they carry themselves, that they don't seem like they would be together and then they're together and it's like, wow, that's an interesting dynamic. I've seen that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess it's just different for everybody.
Mhm.
Um, and like, you know, sometimes we touched on this a little bit earlier as far as like, you know, empathy or trying to understand what the other person, you know, the other person's worldview or perception or life experience. And this can particularly come up on the subject of race. And we did a video a while back on the black wife effect, and we got a lot of feedback on that, and a lot of people shared their experiences and their stories. And you know, we were grateful for all the feedback. We had some really insightful comments and people just sharing their different experiences. And sometimes like race was a factor where maybe it was a lack of empathy or just an uncomfortable topic between the two of them because obviously their experiences as different races, you know, a white man and a black woman is going to be different pretty much invariably, I think. Have you had to deal with like the race topic specifically? And like, if so, like, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, isn't that the best part of a video? Of just when others share their experiences, it's just like, oh, I love this.
It
Like,
is.
that's what we're doing. That's why we're here. I love to hear
Yeah.
that for you. And I watched your video, and so it was so cool to
Cool.
see that engagement. So,
Cool.
just side note, it's so awesome. Um, yeah, but definitely, absolutely. I feel very fortunate that my own partner is very kind and very empathetic and in a lot of ways very open-minded, but completely just grew up differently from me in terms of like the diversity around him, the people around him. And one thing that sticks out very clearly is just we live in Washington State, we live in Tacoma, Washington, and his dream has always been to move to Eastern Washington. And Eastern Washington is completely different. I mean, just climate wise is completely different, but
Yeah.
demographic also is completely different. And I, as a person of color, I have never heard, and gosh, if anyone's watching from Eastern Washington, no offense, it is beautiful there. I love this for you, I do. But I've really never heard of anyone, a person of color, saying, yeah, move here. Like, you're going to be accepted. Everything's going to go well. And
Yeah.
anytime I bring that up to him, he's like, no, no way. Like, it's beautiful. Like, the people are so nice. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, to you, Rick. Like,
Yeah.
to
Right.
you, they are. To you, they will
Yeah.
be. And it's small things like that, but they're really big in terms of just showing how different our lives are. And when I go to a place, I look at it, even if I'm not fully paying attention, I still bring to it a completely different perspective in most cases than he
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. And like sometimes, and I feel you on that, like 100%. And, you know, I can understand why you would have some trepidation with that. I would too if I was in your shoes. I would have trepidation with that as a white man moving to certain
Sure.
places where there's too many of
Yeah.
me. That's just how I roll. But I mean, like, um, you know, sometimes though we make, and I'm not saying this is you, but sometimes we can also make like false assumptions about people. And I've been so guilty of this. So like when my wife and I moved into the place we're in now, you know, we moved somewhere in the country where, you know, it hadn't had the best reputation civil rights wise.
Right.
So I had like people, you know, friends of, a lot of black friends say, "What are you doing moving there?" Right?
Mhm.
And and it made me like a little bit concerned, but it's a pretty multicultural city where we are, and there's you know what I mean. There's people that look like they're in all shades, all different shades and nationalities. But um, I remember there's a elderly neighbor beside us, and when I was here for like the open house, checking the house out, I was like immediately concerned. I was like, oh, she was like, oh, I can't wait to meet your family and all this, and I was like, I don't know, you might not want to meet my family. Um, and so like the moving day came, and she was standing on the other side of the fence, and she said, is your wife here? And I said, yeah. And she popped over and said hello, and like it was just like love. And she shared how she taught in South Chicago, all black schools for like years, and it was like the time of her life. And for me, it's just like a
Yeah.
man, and I was so relieved, right? And like to this day, it's great. Like we love her as a neighbor, and her husband's great. They're awesome neighbors. We couldn't ask for better neighbors. But like, it made me just step back and think like, I was wrong. I mean, it sucks that you have to make those assumptions, but we live in a world where you have to make those assumptions. And so, again, I'm not faulting you for not wanting to move east. Like I get it. And we're talking a whole city, right? That's a lot different than one person. So you have to consider that for sure. And I would never fault you for that. But sometimes in those individual situations with people, sometimes we're just wrong.
Yeah.
And you have to walk around with caution, right? Because you just don't know. And obviously you walk with experience. So you've dealt with people not being nice to you. So your reaction makes sense. But it's just funny how sometimes we're not right in our assumptions, and we can't get it right till we talk to somebody and get to know what they're all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. And I mean, with those assumptions, I try to always make that clear on my channel and my videos too. Like, you can't, sure, be aware, have your eyes open and be present, but you have to kind of limit those assumptions, because those are the same assumptions that can prevent you from being in an interracial relationship that may be really
Yeah,
fulfilling for you, and you maybe meet the love of your life, right? But you could avoid that
right.
if you let those assumptions and kind of like conditioned beliefs hold you back. So you really have to balance that.
Yeah, so Amanda, you got to move to Eastern Washington. It's the only way to know, right?
I knew you were paid off. I knew it.
That's right. He called me before the interview.
Well, and
So
it's
he put me
funny.
up to
His
it.
name is Michael too. So
Okay.
yeah. So I get it.
There you
I know
go.
what this is. I should have known.
We're in cahoots. This isn't even a real podcast.
Love that.
Oh man. So like, okay, looking back, like share with us some key lessons or insights you've gained from your journey interracially dating that you would share with others. Like what's that experience been in your life?
Yeah. Well, I think this is very particular to just black women in general. I think as just a woman, you deal with this forever, and then there's the layer of being a black woman. But just know that no, not everyone will necessarily desire you, but that doesn't mean that you are undesirable, and that doesn't mean that. I'm trying to think of like a nice, succinct way to put it. Essentially, don't think that because of the color of your skin and because of maybe what you were told by someone in school or something you've seen on TV or in the media, or that you've just somehow internalized that you are less than, that you are not worthy of love, and to not limit yourself and your potential for love based off of what you think you can get. Based off of what? Something that maybe you have heard from somewhere else or someone else. So just, I think if you sum it up, it's just to know that you are worthy of love, and
Mhm.
anyone can give you love. Like, being a black woman does not limit your options when it comes to receiving love and giving love.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
outside of that, also, I think just like being really, I think it goes both ways with the empathy. I think when you live in a body and within a race that comes with so much joy and so much beauty, but so much baggage and so much stigma, that it can be kind of easy to, trying to think of how to say this. I think it can be easy to always think that your way is the way, and in a strange way. I think it's easy to kind of dip into that and to be upset when others don't get it. A common comment that I receive in emails or in the comment section is, I would consider an interracial relationship, but I want to be with someone that gets me. And, I say all the time, like, someone doesn't have to understand you to be understanding. And it's more important that they're understanding than that they just, you show up at their door and they completely understand the life that you've lived and the person that you are. So I think really also in the empathy that you want to receive, being able to give that as well, and also being open to other lives that people have lived.
Yeah, and I get how somebody could feel that way. Like, that point of view makes sense. They might just think there's more relationally, there's more relational commonality if they just stay within their race, and that's probably why a lot of people do that. So, like, I get that. And I remember talking about this with my wife like years and years ago, and we were just talking about the reality that I've never walked in her shoes and I never will. And so I just can't relate to that. I can't relate to that side of her other than what she shares with me and what we walk through together, which, we've been together a long time. So I've seen racism against her. I've seen people discriminate against her in different ways, or I've seen microaggressions, things, targeted at her in the past. But I remember she made this comment that, like, I never forgot. And she said, yeah, you might not understand the black side of me, like, fully, just because you're not black yourself, but you also are never going to understand what I deal with as a woman, because you're not a woman. So, like, you're right, you can never fully grasp somebody else's point of view firsthand. You can only go off your own, but you can learn from them, keep an open mind, like we were talking about earlier, and just grow together that way and understand them better. So, I mean, I think you can get that from anybody, no matter who you're dating and what race you're dating.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%. And, as you were saying that, this came into mind too. We're not just black. You're not just white. I'm not just a woman. You're not just a man. I'm also a reader. I also enjoy knitting. I also, like, there's so many parts of your identity that someone doesn't have to check off the box of being able to relate to every single box that there is, or every piece of your identity. Like, you're so much more. And I think it's important too to not just be so consumed. I mean, appreciate and respect and have pride in, but you don't have to be so consumed by just one aspect of your identity. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's just a human instinct to get consumed by one, like, specific aspect of a person, and, like, writing off all the other aspects of somebody's identity and somebody's being, like you just shared. You can still have so many things in common. You can still like the same kind of music. You can still like the same kind of movies, go to the same kind of church, whatever it is. Like, there's so many other aspects to a person's being, but, obviously, racial identity takes a lot of precedent in people's minds. And so, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So in your experience, have you encountered stereotypes or misconceptions from white men that you've talked to about interracial relationships, like particularly those involving black women? They might have, like, weird views about black women. Have you dealt with that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I think now I've been with my partner for a while, but I think just also getting older and dating, like, maybe a different caliber of just people in general. Some things have kind of weeded themselves out naturally, but I definitely think kind of a common thread was always this feeling on their end of like this idea of not measuring up. And you know, you can interpret that in a ton of ways, and they're probably all accurate in how they saw that. And I feel this is so common with Black women. It's like we never, our full identity, all those pieces of our identity that I was just speaking of, so often it seems like it gets lost, and we are painted as caricatures. And the caricature could either be very aggressive and hard to handle, hard to manage, but the other side can be that overbearing, which is still, I guess, a form of aggression, but that like almost overly nurturing, overly mothering side to us that in a lot of ways kind of like, I think, desexualizes us and really kind of like disembodies us in a sense as well. But there's just, I encountered that a lot of, you know, feeling, these men feeling as if like they couldn't measure up to whatever this idea of masculinity and of manhood that they thought that I had. And of course, it was always in comparison to a Black man, right? Because that's what they always thought that they were competing with. And so that was definitely something of them just thinking, worried that I didn't think that they were man enough in a plethora of ways.
How did you respond to those situations when you did deal with that?
Yeah, well, you know, I remember this one time. I always think it's funny, but I think it really does show where they were at, where there was this guy, and it was like a first date, and I remember him asking me, like, hey, have you ever dated a white guy before? And I was like, have you? And
I love that.
and so,
What do you say?
yeah, and he was like, no, like, you know, he was so caught off guard, right? And I always loved that because I felt like, yes, you know, it feels so good when you get a zinger in, you know?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I love that.
But yeah, I feel like a lot of times the ways that I have dealt with it is in just questioning. So if, you know, even with that, like it was a joke, and eventually he kind of laughed and realized it was just in jest. But I feel like a lot of times in just questioning people, well, why do you feel that way? Oh, really? What makes you think that? Like if people can kind of work it through and work it out and process it, either A, they will recognize kind of, I don't want to say ridiculous, I don't want to fully dismiss their opinion and perspective, but either they'll realize it's kind of silly, or you will realize that they haven't realized how silly it is, and you recognize like, oh, we're probably not going to be the most compatible, they're probably not right for me because they only see me in this way.
Yeah, I think sometimes people just, you know, white men especially might just not understand the dynamic of, you know, what a Black woman is like, and it might just be different from what they've dated in the past. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm not picking favorites or even like trying to express any kind of biases, but people are just different, right? And people of different races are different. They you know, carry themselves in different ways. They might have personality traits that are different. And obviously there's like exceptions, but like, you know, Coulter Bouchard talked about this just with his experiences with his wife, where, you know, there's been cases where like, why does his wife, who's Black, have to apologize for the way she is? Like sometimes they're just, Black women, I think, are perceived unfairly in their differences and how their personalities might be, or, you know, or the way they speak, or just the way they carry themselves. Like they just carry themselves differently, and it can be off-putting to like somebody that hasn't been around that, and they've grown up in a different world. You know, maybe like the place where, you know, you might be moving, you know what I'm saying? But where they're just not used to the diversity of people. And so they see those differences as like bad things, which, you know, I think is ridiculous. Like Coulter, I'm trying to remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of like, she's not going to apologize for being the way that she is. Like, that's how she is. And like, I don't know. I think people lack that understanding sometimes, and they expect you to act exactly like the last person who dated, who might be totally different, who might have been, you know what I mean? White woman who's like rural and just had a totally different upbringing and totally different like cultural experience. Like people just aren't the same.
Mhm.
Like I think people have to understand that. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
for sure.
How do you think the media and like just culture today portray women in interracial relationships? Is there any like observations or like specific patterns that you've seen?
Yeah. Well, I do think in general the media, and I think we still have a ways to come in just the diversity of representation when it comes to black women. I think it's getting way
Mhm.
better. So I don't want to knock it completely because I think it's come a long way. But I do just think in
Mhm.
general we need more stories. We need more we need more variety in the black women that the media presents to us. Um, it's interesting. I've seen a lot of dynamics where I feel seen a few shows where like the main relationship is an interracial one between a black woman and a white
Yeah.
man, which maybe that says enough in and of itself of how much work we need to do. But I
Mhm.
have noticed a few things where there seems to be commonly this element of still that kind of like forbidden fruit, or one side is still trying to hide, or can't remember what show it was, but there was a show where it was a younger girl and she had a white boyfriend and she had to hide it because she was like president of this club for I think like black women. And so,
Mhm.
she tried to hide that because, of course, that would compromise her blackness, right? And her position
Yeah.
in this particular group. And so I still see that. I even can think of an old video or movie. I'm sure you remember, like, The Guest Who's Coming to Dinner. I remember the one
Yeah.
with Bernie Mac and Ashton Kutcher. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it seems like that's still kind of a dynamic. So I really would love to actually just see more. Gosh, my dream, Mike, would be a show where it's not that race is never discussed, but that it's like the last thing in a sense that's
Mhm.
discussed. Because I mean, I don't want to speculate what your marriage is like, but I'm assuming that on a day-to-day basis, even a monthly, weekly basis, race itself probably doesn't come up, and maybe in terms of like your content or things that you see, but you
Yeah.
probably, arguments are probably about like bills, or oh, I don't want to go to
Yeah.
this party, you want to go, I don't want to go, or the age
Yeah.
old, what do we eat tonight, like
Yeah.
it's
Just like regular people
it's
stuff, whatever that is.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would just love to see more of those relationships, which are just relationships. Not to say like don't pretend that it's not there. I hate the whole colorblind thing. I don't see race. But
Mhm.
just really
Yeah.
actually showing us as just the normal couples that we are.
Yeah. That's funny that you say that. Like I've never actually thought about that in the way that you put it. And it's like, yeah, like obviously, we've discussed race at length. We've been together a long time. But it doesn't dominate the dinner table conversation every night by any stretch. If there's something relevant that will come up, we'll discuss it. If there's some news piece that we want to talk about that might have happened, obviously we'll discuss it. And there's no fear of discussing those topics. But yeah, like there's just like, well, okay, what are we eating tonight? Or what are we doing this weekend? Like regular stuff. But I think like when it comes to media, there's always like a narrative, and so they want to capitalize on that, right? They want to come off as, yeah, look what we've got. You know what I mean? Anytime there's a TV show or something, they want to capitalize on the fact that they have diversity, the fact that they don't have a conventional relationship there. It's a business
For
thing.
sure.
I know you took a break from doing some videos. Hopefully you're gonna get back on. I know you put one up recently, but are you planning to put some more stuff up soon? Are you still on this hiatus?
Yeah, I think I'm back. Knock on the wood right here. Um, I think I'm back, though. I definitely want to get back to making more content. And, like I was saying earlier about just the video and engagement, it's so fulfilling. Even there are definitely those that kind of try to kill the joy, but it really is so fulfilling to get to connect with people. And I love when people share their stories with me, or when they say, you know, I went on this date because I watched your video, or I talked to this person I would have never. It's like, yes, that's so cool. So for sure, I definitely plan to come back full time, or some amount of time.
Well, that's awesome. So the name of the channel is Amanda Awakens. It's on YouTube, and we will definitely leave it in the show notes so people can go check it out. And Amanda, thanks for hanging out with us today. This was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your insights. I think your channel honestly answers a ton of questions that people are afraid to ask, and so they don't have to ask. They can just watch and learn.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And that'll do it for this edition. If you are or have been in an interracial relationship, drop us a comment and let us know what your experience has been like. We love hearing from you guys. We love your comments. And also click that like button and subscribe button, and check us out for our other content. We post weekly, and always find us at mikecpodcast.com. We're out of here. Till next time. Thanks, guys.
The Mike C. Podcast.